Okay.
So there's 3 of us here, by the way.
And what are your names again?
Brandon.
Brandon.
Yep, I'm Devin.
Devin.
The guy that you can't see, Manton.
The most
Manton.
The most beautiful of the bunch.
Manton, Devin, Brandon.
Yes,
Right.
sir.
You have to have an O-N ending to your name.
Yeah,
to
we've
work
talked
that way.
about that.
Yeah.
It's funny.
That's part of the podcast.
Yeah.
It is now.
All right, so does it matter how long we go? We usually go anywhere between 45 minutes to an hour or a little bit longer, but we can do shorter, we can do whatever.
Well, why don't we just see how it's going? I mean, if it's going well, keep going. If we run out of steam, then, we'll run out of steam.
Absolutely.
Sounds great.
Fair enough.
Yeah?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is he a good volume for you all?
Yeah,
Can you hear?
sounds good.
Everybody
I
good?
can hear you guys, yes.
Wonderful.
Beautiful.
Oh yeah, but once again, we edited it afterwards, so if there's anything we need to edit out, sometimes I even mess up the intro and we got to start over and do it again, so whatever you want to do, we can edit anything in and out after the fact.
Okay, good.
Are we good on, Manton's working, he's the sound and tech guy, he's working on a few things here, but we should be ready here in a minute.
I
should have plugged a microphone in, it would have made it better for you, but I don't have a microphone. I don't have a microphone that goes in my iPad.
I mean, honestly, it sounds fine. Every interview we actually do usually is someone going through their Mac mic or whatever. It's fine.
At least it's the MacBook Pro, so I can have my hands free,
Right. No, it's good.
So he can gesture at us offensively and just flick us off the whole time.
I can say, I have told you.
Whenever you're addressing, I want you to point to us. Just Devin, Brandon, and then just point off screen for man.
This is why you can't trust people's dick photos.
There you go. Forced perspective.
That's right.
Unbelievable. Are we good, man?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
I think it looks fine. I mean, as far as like pulling it from Skype, it looks perfectly serviceable.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're getting very good, clear video, so that's good.
Wonderful.
Awesome.
Beautiful. All right, so again, we're going to do our intro. We're going to talk about what the cast does. We're going to introduce, right? The co-host.
It'll be like a minute of me introducing these guys, and then we'll get right to you.
Okay.
Awesome. You guys ready?
Ready when you are, buddy.
Manton?
Yeah. Let me just turn this. I think it looks stupid with the green screen on. We'll just leave it on. Okay. All right. Let's do that. All right.
Here we go. Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to a very special episode of the Horrorble Podcast, where we like to bring you a uniquely face value view on horror movies. First off, I always want to say that we're on email, Facebook, and Twitter. Our email is horrorbolepodcast@gmail.com. That's HORRORBLE podcast@gmail.com. Our Facebook is just Horrorble Podcast, and our Twitter is @HorribleCast. I'm Devin Arnold. I'm here with my co-host this week. First off, Bluetster, dude, how are you doing? Are you excited today?
I'm doing fabulous. I had an odd day at work, but it's all just been straight uphill afterwards, and I feel like I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I feel like our short podcast career is just reaching up to the skies right now. I feel like this is the moment we've all been working for.
Absolutely, believe me. I think we're all gushing. We're gushing with excitement. Manton, man, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing amazingly, Devin.
Awesome. Yeah, today we got a huge one, and I kind of can't believe we're doing it still. We are doing an interview today. We are with the mastermind behind films like Paperhouse, Immortal Beloved, and of course the Horrorble Crew favorite, Candyman. We're with writer-director Bernard Rose. Bernard, thanks for joining us.
Oh, no, did we lose him already?
Oh, no.
First thing, I couldn't tell if he was just sitting still.
Oh, no. What's going on?
We can just call him back and we'll start right when I say his name wrong. Are you still
That's a pretty
there?
funny picture.
Call him back.
It's just frozen on his
I
face.
can hear you fine.
Oh, okay.
Can you hear me?
No, we couldn't for a second there. We lost you for a second.
But now you can hear me, right?
Yeah.
So
we'll just
Can you see me?
Yeah.
Right. Basically, I just said thanks for joining us, and you can just come in and say whatever you want. We'll just go from there.
Okay. All right. Hi. Thank you for having me.
We are so excited to have you, Bernard. Honestly, thank you so much. And first, we'd like to give the listeners an idea of where exactly you're coming in from right now.
I'm in Los Angeles.
Right.
In West Hollywood, actually, to be specific.
Right. So right now it's 6 p.m. and probably beautiful weather on your side?
It's night, as you can see out the window.
Right.
But it was a nice sunny... It was sunny today. It was actually a little bit chilly. It was about 65.
Right. Okay.
I had to wear a light jacket going outside, you know.
Oh,
Is
wow.
Chilly
is
for
it
you?
freezing where you are?
Oh,
yes.
you better believe it. Double jacket, double sweater. It's like, it was -10 last week.
Yeah, where are you exactly?
Oh, we're in Louisville, Kentucky, in the Midwest kind of area.
Yeah, I have family that live in Michigan, so I go there, and recently it was just unbelievably cold.
I can believe it. Oh, yeah, that area up there with Wisconsin and Michigan is a nightmare to me.
It's like Canada, but not.
Except with all the beautiful mountains, basically.
Right. But how long? I'm actually curious myself. I've read about you a lot of stuff, but I've never gotten the idea. How long have you lived in L.A.?
Well, actually, I came to Los Angeles in 1991 for the purpose of making Candyman. So basically, I came here to shoot that movie and never went home. I mean, I guess if it had been a flop, I might have gone home.
Well, lucky for us it wasn't, right?
Yeah.
Right. No, actually, I wondered that because I know you came here and shot it in, I guess not in Chicago, but it's based in Chicago, Illinois. Was it there, or was it...
I shot for about a week in Chicago, but the rest of the film was actually done in Los Angeles. A lot of it was done in downtown LA and in a studio in Silver Lake, which is Occidental Studios, which is just in Silver Lake, which is actually one of the oldest studios in the city, and dated from, you know, the early years of the silent movies.
Wow.
Wow, actually, that's impressive.
That's really neat. Do you actually go back to visit... are you from Liverpool originally?
No, Clive Barker is from Liverpool. I'm from London.
Okay, so Liverpool, was that where the short story was based, The Forbidden, the Clive Barker short story?
Yeah, Clive, the original story was set in Liverpool, because like I said, Clive is absolutely a native of Liverpool. So he was writing about the kind of housing projects that existed there that he was familiar with. And, you know, I actually had spent time in Liverpool because one of my ex-wives, my second wife, was actually a Liverpudlian. And so at the time I had in-laws that lived there, so I had spent quite a lot of time there. When I read it, it was set up in this. I don't know if you've read the original story. It's basically set in a kind of Liverpudlian housing project in a kind of derelict area, and and it is about this woman who's writing a thesis about. I mean, the basic premise is the same as the movie. This woman is writing a thesis, and she's going around trying to find out who or what the Candyman was.
Right. Yeah, actually, I read it recently, and there were some striking similarities, but also some pretty cool differences too. Before we get too deep into that, I promise we're getting back to that because that's again one of our group favorite films. It's certainly my favorite film, and I want to kind of backtrack a bit, and we'd love to just hear you kind of discuss or talk about when you started getting into film and how that kind of started. Well,
I mean, I made amateur films in the 70s when I was a kid, when I was a teenager. I started on standard 8mm, which was 16mm cut in half, and then I worked on Super 8 and 60. I graduated to 16mm, and when I was a teenager, the BBC had a competition where you could make like a short 3-minute film and send it to them, and if you won the competition, they showed you a movie on television, which nowadays isn't a big deal. You make something, you upload it to YouTube, whatever. But back then in London, there were literally only 3 television stations, and BBC One was the highest rated show, and so I won the competition, and my film was shown on the BBC, which meant in 1976. Which back then that meant that every single person you knew or had ever met saw it.
Right. Amazing.
That was the only entertainment there was.
I feel like that's one of the differences between television, classic television and internet. Like, you might have a larger audience potentially on the internet, but television, you're gonna reach those people that you actually know, right? People that could meet you.
I showed the film was shown, like 7 million people saw it.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Absurd. That's how it was back then,
So how old were you when you won that competition?
I was 15.
That's amazing.
Wow.
Did you know? Sorry.
Yeah, and then after that, I carried on making amateur films because obviously I was encouraged by that. And then I eventually, through a set of bizarre circumstances, ended up working for Jim Henson on The Muppet Show.
Wow.
Well, that's cool. I mean, did you know as a teenager that you were going to be, destined for stardom? I mean, what did you think of the fact that your movie was shown to 7 million people? I mean, that's got to be huge, for a 15-year-old.
Well, it was. I mean, it definitely, I was already pretty obsessed with doing it. In fact, I think it was the 3rd time I entered that competition.
Oh, nice.
I mention that. The first 2 times I didn't win it.
I shouldn't have said that. Oh, I got it first time. Aced it.
Natural.
But it's one of those things. That's how you win a competition like that. You don't stop making the stuff. And by the time I entered the 3rd time, I was pretty good at it. So I obviously I was encouraged. But I never really seriously thought about doing anything else. It's always just what I've done. And nowadays, of course, it's so easy to make a film.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Everybody has the technology in their telephone,
Right. Well, that should be a testament to what you were doing back then, because you're talking about 15 years old doing that kind of stuff, and then it's hard to believe still that you made, let's talk about Paperhouse. You made that, and how old must have you been when that movie came out?
I was 27 when I made Paperhouse.
Yeah, and that's regarded as, a masterpiece and a classic to many. And so it really doesn't surprise us for you to tell us that you kind of got into the industry as a 15-year-old. Is Paperhouse the first full-length feature that you did?
No, it's actually my 3rd full-length feature.
Okay.
But I did 2 films for the BBC prior to that.
Right.
I mean, after I worked for Jim, I went to film school in 1980.
Okay.
And I spent 3 years there at a postgraduate film school. And while I was there, I started making music videos. And I was very lucky in that the first video I ever made, the record went to #1 all over the world, so
wow.
that helped.
That's amazing.
That was Red Red Wine for UB40.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
I didn't say Red Red Wine by UB40?
Yeah. That was the first video I made. So that was good. After that, I had a career doing that for a while, and I was I did a band that was very controversial at the time called Frankie Goes to Hollywood.
Okay.
They had a record called Relax that was like banned everywhere because people thought it was obscene.
Okay.
It wasn't obscene. But it was kind of gleefully obscene.
Right.
And I made the video for that, and that was considered very shocking. And the BBC banned the record, and it was like a whole hoo-ha. But it's one of those odd things that it was a hoo-ha, but the record became the biggest selling record of the 1980s.
Yeah.
So, in fact, the same week the BBC had banned the records, a producer at the BBC telephoned me and invited me to go down there for a meeting. I was 23, and he said, would you like to come here and make some movies? I said, sure.
Why not?
Whoa. As a 23-year-old, I can't imagine
I was 23,
that.
and they gave me an office at the BBC and basically let me make a couple of movies.
That's amazing.
Pretty much using, their facilities, which were considerable, as you can imagine.
Oh, I'm sure.
And so I did a couple of movies there, and then I did Paperhouse. So I think it's always that thing. It's always difficult when you're making your first film because you don't know anything and there's a lot to learn and all that stuff.
Sure.
So, but by the time I made Paperhouse, I was pretty seasoned. I'd been making films since I was 15. I'd worked for Jim on Dark Crystal and on The Muppet Show, so I'd had a lot of professional experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I made 2 full-length films for the BBC and made a whole bunch of music videos. So I went into Paperhouse it was officially my debut, but I was pretty experienced by then.
Right. Well, yeah, Paperhouse, even though it's kind of like notable for your, I don't know, first major full-length film, it does absolutely have this vibe of it, of a well-versed director, and it looks like you already have your stamp on it before most people had seen your other work. Before that, were you just you were what said like music videos and these little short films and stuff? Were you doing more of the directing side, or were you also writing before Paperhouse, like writing your films?
Well, I used to write the music videos, of course. I used to write scripts for them, but I didn't write the screenplay for Paperhouse. Actually, it was written by a very good friend of mine called Matthew Jacobs.
Right, I wanted to ask about him.
But it was developed. I developed it as a screenplay with him and with the producer Tim Bevan. Tim Bevan, who of course became very, very well-known producer, runs a company called Working Title to this day, multiple Oscar-nominated producer.
Right.
But Tim was just producing music videos for us. I mean, back in London in the day, in the early 80s, we were just kids, you know?
Right.
And Paperhouse was actually the first film that Tim produced.
Oh, okay.
So you know, he was basically saying, I was actually with another music video company, and he poached me away by saying that he would get me a feature film, and God knows why I believed him, because he'd never done it before.
He just had such a confidence-inspiring tone.
Right.
But, yeah, but he was telling me the truth, and he did. He made it happen, and my friend Matthew, who I was at film school with, we developed a script from a novel. It's based on a novel called Marianne Dreams, and we developed it as a screenplay over a number of years, actually. And Tim got it financed. Nobody wanted to pay for that film because I think people regarded it as profoundly uncommercial, and they weren't wrong. It was, but it's an unusual movie, you know.
No, it certainly was ahead of its time. We're speaking from a younger generation, but seeing it does kind of remind us of these movies now that are more popular, these fantastical, almost like Guillermo del Toro type movies. And that's what blows me away, is this movie kind of predated those kind of movies by, a couple decades.
What was the film that Del Toro made about the girl in the Civil War? What's
Pan's
it called?
Labyrinth.
Oh, yeah.
Pan's Labyrinth.
Pan's Labyrinth is the plot of Pan's Labyrinth is pretty much copied from Paperhouse.
Right, it's very similar.
Yeah.
I was actually like shocked as we were watching, and I'm like, I feel like Del Toro probably took more than a few strokes from this movie.
Well, I think he did, but you know, as they say, imitation is the highest form of flattery.
Sure.
And
yeah.
you know, and his film is really well done. So you know.
No, that's crazy you say that, because that title was brought up multiple times when we've revisited that movie recently. It's just like, man, I can't get over how much this looks like that kind of style. But I mean, again, like you should be flattered. It's a very beautiful, amazing, fantastical style. And on that, I wanted to even talk about the film score of it, because obviously I know that film scores are important to you. And you had Hans Zimmer do that, is that right?
That's right. Well, it's actually Hans's first score.
Really?
Yeah.
I
knew Hans. Like I said, I was involved in the music industry in the early '80s, and with this band Frankie Goes to Hollywood, and hello, are you frozen? Are you there?
We're still here.
We're good.
Yeah. So I did these videos for this band Frankie Goes to Hollywood, which was produced by a very brilliant and important record producer in London called Trevor Horn, who also happened to be one half of the Buggles.
Oh, yeah.
And before Trevor became a very famous producer, he produced records for Grace Jones and Seal and God knows who else. But before he became this hugely important producer, he was one half of the Buggles, and the other half of the Buggles was Hans Zimmer.
Right.
I don't think people realize this is like where he started. And Hans was the only guy who knew how to program the very crude sampling device we had back then called the Fairlight, which then became a thing called the Synclavier, which was, probably has the computing power of your iPhone now, but you know, it was what people. It was a big ass machine.
Yeah.
And you had to program it with DOS commands, and Hans was the only guy who knew how to do that, and so he was very kind of in demand, and he worked for a composer called Stanley Myers, who was a big composer. Stanley Myers did the Deer Hunter, for example.
Oh, wow.
Among other things. You know, the famous guitar piece in the Deer Hunter was Stanley Myers.
Wow.
And Hans worked for him as his assistant, and he used to program the synthesized music and stuff in his studio. And you know, in that capacity, Hans had done a lot of very impressive and important work. Probably the most notable thing was he did all the programming on Full Metal Jacket.
Right.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
The score of which was credited to Kubrick's daughter under the name Abigail Mead, but actually I know that Hans did all the actual programming on that film, and he did work on a lot of big films like that, like The Last Emperor. He did a lot of stuff for Sakamoto, and I think Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence. He worked on a lot of very impressive things, but not as the composer. And when I was doing my BBC film, it was a question that in fact Stanley Myers did the score for one of the films that I did, but Stanley was, you know, he was busy, and he kind of like put a lot of it onto his assistant. His assistant turned out to be Hans Zimmer.
Wow.
So you know, Hans and I became friends doing that, and then later on when I was doing Paperhouse, actually I hired Stanley to do the score, and Stanley did a very beautiful job with it, and it was really kind of exquisite. But the producers and the company that I made it for, Vestron, kind of thought the score was too kind of, I don't know, too polite or arty or something, and they really wanted it redone. And it was kind of a problem because we'd run out of money. We didn't have any money to have an orchestral session anymore or anything like that. And so I remember saying to Hans, well, what the hell can we do? You know, we're fucked. We don't have no money to redo it. And Hans goes, don't worry, I'm going to just do it. How about this house? So Hans sat there and he programmed the whole thing, you know, in his synclavier. And that was the score to Paperhouse. Wow. There are still some parts of it which are done by Stanley, which is why they still share credit on the film. Mm-hmm. But, you know, it was, that's what happened. And Hans, and he, you know, Hans is, to say he never looked back would be a grotesque understatement. I mean, you know, obviously.
Right.
Obviously, he's epic now. I mean.
Yeah. So, have you worked with them? You worked with them more after that too, right?
I did, but it was sort of, by then he kind of already really moved on, and I think he was doing what Stanley had done and farming it out to his assistants. And you know, to me, that's kind of annoying. I mean, you know, so it didn't really work as well as it had done on Paperhouse, where you know, it was really a really good collaboration, and he did a really amazing job, I think. You know, yeah. I love Hans' score. I love the score he did for Interstellar. I thought that was really
that was really,
it's one of my favorite recent movies. I mean, you make Paperhouse sound like it's almost like a happy accident, but watching the movie, I would have never guessed that. It seems so integral. It seems like it was planned from day one. I mean, did you work really closely with Hans? Was he there for most of the project? I mean, how did that work out?
Yeah, I mean, there is stuff that was always very integral to it, like the bits that are Fauré's Requiem and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. That was all very much kind of, and a lot of the score is based on the kind of chord structure of Fauré's Requiem. But yeah, but the rest, but all that other stuff that Hans did I think was very much Hans, and he was at the time really just finding his style, and it's become kind of a familiar style because he's done so much work. But really, when he did Paperhouse, that was really the first time that he'd ever really done any of that stuff, I think.
That's so cool. One of my most memorable jingles, I hate to call it a jingle, but just little tunes I heard in the movie, and it was actually one of the shortest. It was in the later scenes where they're in the house, and the father is kind of chasing after the daughter, and I think they're in the room with all the candles on the floor, and there's like a weird, almost boombox-looking machine on the wall, and it starts making this very crazy trance synth sound, and it just, I'll never forget it. It just blew me away. I thought it was the coolest shit I'd ever heard. And
you know, there's that voice that comes out of the radio.
Yeah.
Who is it? Well, actually, a very good friend of mine was a sound designer called Nigel Holland, and he had this thing. I was like, well, how are we going to make this radio sound really disturbing? You know, what is the voice going to be? And he had a recording of I don't know where the fuck he got it from. It was a recording of the Nuremberg rallies of Hitler.
Oh my gosh!
But it was recorded in the 30s. So he would talk, and there'd be this, and
it's probably distorted.
And then there'd be this cheering, but it was recorded on one of those old ribbon microphones. So instead of you hearing the cheering, it was like, it was really sort of.
It sounds very. Oh my gosh, man!
And that was the sound of thousands of Nazis cheering.
Wow! Holy shit!
And so we took this voice, this recording of Hitler, and the people who liked him back then in the day. And that's what's coming out the radio if you listen to it really carefully. It's actually Hitler. I remember actually it's one of those odd things. Obviously, when you deliver a film, as I'm sure you're aware, you have to clear everything copyright-wise.
Sure.
You know, the producers were like, "Well, where did you get this stuff from?" And
a friend had it.
Well, it's a recording of Hitler in the Nuremberg rallies, and this. Somebody who was in charge of post-production were like, well, who should I call to clear the rights to that? And I said, well, why don't you call the German embassy and ask them for the Third Reich department?
Oh my God!
I always love to hear about these behind-the-scenes things. They're always funnier than you imagine.
I think whoever made that phone call probably got hung up on very fast.
Very quickly, yeah.
They probably thought they were being, they probably thought it was a joke,
Actually, I did actually trace the copyright. In fact, any stuff that's considered to be Nazi propaganda is considered public domain because it was spoils of war. So there you go.
Spoils of war.
You want to use anything of Hitler's, it's public domain.
Well, thank God for that.
We'll remember that for the next
podcast.
episode. I guess I shouldn't be surprised because you had a lot of early work with music, and it's clear that music is like an integral part of all of your movies. And I'm just wondering, not specifically Paperhouse, but I mean, what kind of role do you think the music that you choose or you produce for these movies plays? How does it fit into the story or the themes?
Well, I think that, music is very important to films. I mean, obviously, the relationship between music and films has been a very close one since the very early days of silent films. Were never silent. They always had a musical accompaniment. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's a lot of similarities between music and film, and that they both, work on us on an emotional level that's non-verbal, and that's why the combination of music and pictures is a very, very powerful one. But having said that, and obviously, especially with like the Beethoven film and with other films I've done, the music was very much preordained, and I would be shooting things to playback,
right?
But I think in a lot of films nowadays, I think music is overused, and I think that when you have a constant score with no let-up, sometimes it kind of makes the music disappear into just wallpaper.
Yep.
And I think that especially with the sophistication of sound design that you can have nowadays, sometimes it's a lot better to have things be impacted through sound effects and things which are not necessarily tonal, but using the sounds in a musical way can often be a lot more emotive and subtle, I think, than just using music. To me, I like it when the music is actually carrying a different idea, especially when it comes to scares and stuff like that. If you do them musically, it can kind of sound rather cliche. One of the things I loved about the score with Candyman, which was done by Philip Glass, obviously, was that I remember saying to Philip, whatever you do, don't do any scares. Don't do that. We'll deal with that. Just deal with something else. And he was perfectly happy to do that.
I think that kind of reads perfectly with the film. That makes a lot of sense because, he doesn't have any weird, fusions of scare sounds and score. I think it's just a very beautiful score in a vacuum, but it still works with the film. I kind of want to use that to transition and talk about, first off, I want to go back to Paperhouse just briefly, because Paperhouse, to me, when I first saw it, was one of the most genre-bending, just genre-less movies I've ever seen. You just don't know where to put it, and that's fine. But there were points in that, for the sake of this being a horror podcast, there were points that had some very serious terror or horror elements in it that were clear to me. And I want to know, where does that come from? Is that just naturally coming out, or is there some kind of infatuation you had with the genre before you made these movies?
Well, I've always liked this horror genre. I think the horror genre is very misunderstood, because I think obviously, 99.9% of horror movies are trash.
Yeah. It's an unfortunate reality.
Yeah.
But the 0.1% are some of the best movies ever made.
Yeah, absolutely.
And are very often the works of the most important directors. I mean, the obvious examples, The Shining and The Exorcist and all those films, which are very in the canon. But there's also other films which are not as well known, like Hour of the Wolf, Ingmar Bergman's horror movie, which is amazing and terrifying, and The Devils by Ken Russell, and I don't know if you've ever seen a film called Don't Look Now by Nicholas Rowe.
We recently watched that again.
That's an amazing movie and terrifying,
right?
But profound as well. It's a brilliant film.
Right.
One of the best films ever made about the supernatural, in my opinion. And I think that the point about horror, and for me, horror has to include a supernatural element to really be horror. Like, if it's just, to me, Silence of the Lambs is not a horror film.
Yeah.
It's a police procedural.
Right.
It's a very good police procedural, but it's a police procedural. A horror film has to have a supernatural element. And because a horror film has to have a supernatural element, I think there actually is this other very interesting side effect of that, which is if your horror film is convincing, i.e. you actually frighten people with a manifestation of the supernatural.
Right.
That's an experience you can't give people in real life, because in real life we have this evil, desperate yearning for the supernatural, because it's a kind of way of overcoming the fear of death.
Right.
That something, it doesn't matter, even if it's a terrifying thing from the other world or from beyond the grave, it's still better than the idea of just nothing. Nothing is what we suspect is the truth, and that's what leads to people's existential dread. Right. And I think that the horror film is a kind of mechanism that mollifies that.
Escapism,
and that's the attraction.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely.
I think it's surprising that you say that horror hinges on supernatural. I mean, obviously, Paperhouse and Candyman are very supernatural, but the things I thought that were the scariest were the most rooted, right? Like, in Candyman, you have the racial issues and the family crises, and then in Paperhouse, you have the kind of the father figure, like depending on the relationship you have with your dad, that could be very terrifying.
Well, let's talk about that, because, I wanted to say, to the exact same point, that even Roger Ebert, talking about Candyman, says that he loved it because it scared him with ideas and gore, and not simply with gore, and which is what he would be used to at that time from a horror film. And so you did bring in a very social aspect to the movie Candyman, and I would love for you to kind of talk on that.
Well, I mean, when the original story had that in it, but it was from the perspective of, it was class-based. It was about a working class housing project in Liverpool. But at a certain point in the film, I remember saying to Clive Barker when I was really very early on in trying to adapt it, I remember saying to him that I wanted to set the film in America because I thought it would make it more commercial. I think if I'd made the film set in the north of England, I would be dealing with a lot of difficult to understand accents.
Absolutely, right.
That. And I know that Clive had the experience with Hellraiser, where he'd ended up having to basically loop the film into a kind of mid-Atlantic, which I think he felt had made the film suffer a little. it does give it a slightly kind of distancing feel, which I mean the film is wonderful anyway, but
right.
It was something that he'd definitely come up against, and so he was very aware of. So I said, let's just set the film in America, because then it's not an issue, and it might be more interesting, because when I took the film away from the UK and into America, it stopped it being about class and it became about race.
Right.
Which I think added a whole other dimension to the movie.
Yep.
And to the character, especially. And I went to Chicago to do some research, and I went around Cabrini Green, and I saw the truth of those places and what was going on. And then, it just made the whole film much richer and much more exciting, because it was something rooted in reality. And I think it comes down to what we were saying earlier, is that if you're going to make something fantastic, it must be real. And if you want to make something frightening, you must have an arena and a setting that's frightening. And in the Gothic Romantic era, what was frightening was crumbling graveyard,
right?
Old mansion that was, scary and spooky. But it seemed to me that, especially when I went into the housing projects in Cabrini Green, that they were absolutely terrifying. The policemen that would show me around that were frightened of the place.
Wow.
It was in itself a very frightening and alienating environment for the people who lived there, and for anyone who stepped foot in it. So a perfect arena for a horror film,
Right. It really, really, really clicks in the film. So you're saying you walked around in it extensively yourself before writing and shooting this film?
Yeah, I went there, yeah.
It must have been an interesting experience, especially coming over from England at that point and seeing that, because of course the film does the same thing, but even people of Chicago were probably scared to do that. I imagine doing that for this film was a very cool and interesting experience, right?
Yeah, and I didn't do it unescorted, let me be clear.
Sure.
Is this, I have to know, so you were still pretty young at this point. Was this your first experience in America, going straight to our ghettos?
No, I'd been visiting the U.S. since, I actually first went to Hollywood in 1979, I think. I first went to Los Angeles.
Of course.
I've been coming to America, to do various things. So I shot some music videos in America. I shot a video for Roy Orbison in Nashville in the early 80s, So I'd been there. I'd actually worked in America too. But it was the first time I went there to do a feature film,
I got you. Very cool. It just could be eye-opening if I go to a country and the first thing I experience is, potential violence. Might turn me off. I don't know. So that's cool. I think that it was interesting for me, kind of hearing your perspective, adding to the supernatural versus the real. We have this very real, terrifying in its own right place that this story lives in,
right?
And everyone else trying to kind of escape out of it using
urban legends.
Urban legends, exactly, to try and escape that reality. So,
right. What kind of stamp did you put on the film that didn't come from? I know. Obviously, it's inspired by Clive Barker's The Forbidden, the short, but there still feels like there's so much of your stamp on this film, and I wanted to... What kind of elements to this film were just kind of what you came up with during the filming or before the filming? Or?
Well, I mean, obviously the big one was changing the setting and adding the whole racial element to it. And, I mean, and the second thing was something that I discovered when I went to Cabrini Green and talked to people who live there, was the whole idea of... Bloody Mary and calling the mirror, and that wasn't in the story at all.
No.
And so, but yeah, obviously the story was about urban legends, but this struck me as a very kind of frightening thing, and also it was connected to the architecture of the apartments in Cabrini Green, which is reproduced exactly in the film. This whole idea of the medicine cabinets that back onto each other without there being any cinder block or any kind of barrier between them, just the backs of these cabinets. That's actually completely true, and there were murders that happened in Cabrini Green.
That's terrifying.
Where people gained access by bashing their way through people's medicine cabinets. So that was all stuff that I researched and was factual in terms of the architecture as well as the actual kind of murders and the events, and that all became part of the film. So I got a lot out of going to Cabrini Green and visiting it and talking to people there, and and just hanging out there actually. And I think that more than anything really kind of expanded the film for me.
Right. When you were talking to people at the actual Cabrini Green, were there urban legends of their own that you heard by chance? Just wondering.
Well, I mean, the one that I didn't know, the big one was the whole Bloody Mary thing, which became a very important part of the film,
I mean, yeah, I just recently read The Forbidden, and it totally didn't cross my mind. That part was completely, manufactured for the film, and that did add a huge element to the film, and that's great to hear. That's pretty awesome.
It's pretty scary that a lot of the terrifying elements are actually real. It's going to make it even scarier for me next time I watch it.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's funny because I remember when I originally wrote the screenplay, you had to say his name 13 times.
Oh man, that's quite a few.
And we got to the first read through, and we were there, and like, you say his name 13 times, it'll appear behind you. So they're still going, well, right. Yeah, it's like, oh my god. Make it 5.
We'll just shorten it.
Well, watching the movie, and I've seen it quite a few times now, I don't know if this is me reading too much into it or if this was deliberate, but I feel like there was several times in the movie where the name Candyman is said 4 times, and then like it goes on to the next scene. Like maybe, for instance, Helen will be reading her writings and be like, Candyman, 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 and then like somebody from the background will be like, Candyman, and she'll be like, yeah, what do you want to know about him? So I start seeing these things. Maybe I'm going crazy. Maybe I'm going to invent Candyman myself. I don't know. But it just seems like there's a few times in the film where Candyman is said 4 times non-deliberately, and then it kind of cuts off. And I don't know if that's intended or not. Either way, it really does add to the film.
She only says it 5 times once when she calls it.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I love that about it. And you know what, Manton, I actually
I was gonna tell this. So it's kind of funny that we were talking about the Bloody Mary thing, because as a kid, and I'm 26, so I'm pretty young, but when I was a kid, around maybe like 1995 or so, I remember that like we didn't know about the movie Candyman, but that idea of saying Candyman in front of the mirror came up as a kid at like sleepovers and stuff, and it's kind of funny to be an adult now watching that movie, because now I know what it's from, but it's just I think it's kind of interesting that film actually became sort of something that my friends and I told each other, and we didn't even know about the movie, so maybe my friends had older siblings or something that told them about it, but even as kids we would dare each other to say Candyman in front of the mirror. We had no idea what Candyman was, no clue, so it's kind of cool that it sort of became its own thing,
its own urban legend.
Yeah, I think that happens, and that's, that's great when that happens, and it's like the thing kind of enters the culture in that sense.
Yep, absolutely. It's pretty crazy.
I mean, I think
when I was preparing the film, there was I was fairly close to shooting it, and initially when I said to the producers, because obviously he's not an African American man in the short story, so he became one in the script, and there was initially there was a lot of objection to that, and but then they kind of got used to the idea, and we were carrying along, and then we were quite close to shooting the film, and the producers were contacted by the NAACP, who'd gotten a hold of the screenplay, and violently objected to it.
Really?
Yeah. And so they wanted to have a meeting with me to talk about it. And the producers were definitely concerned. I mean, to the point where I think they were, thinking about radically changing course or not doing the movie. And so we had this meeting, and this lady from the NAACP said to me, why? Her point was, why are you doing this? Because, why are you trying to make people more frightened of, a black male than they are anyway? Why would you, you're playing on the sort of fundamental racist fears of white people. That there is this black man out there who's terrifying and going to do this, and I understand why she could
Right.
put it that way. But what I said was, I hear what you're saying, but I think you're fundamentally wrong, because you fundamentally don't understand how these kinds of movies function. In that, the horror villain in this kind of a movie actually, in a weird kind of flip-flop way, becomes the hero.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever they do, however brutal it is, or however ruthless, or however scary it is, in a weird way, they're who the audience roots for. Because, if you think about the movie now, Virginia Madsen is the person who has all screen time. Tony Todd is hardly on screen at all in the movie. But he's who everybody remembers.
Absolutely.
Right.
And you wouldn't dress up Halloween as Virginia.
No.
It just doesn't work like that. It's I think a horror villain is a kind of hero. It's a kind of anti-hero, and it's someone that kids and people dress up as at Halloween. So are you telling me that you can't have an African horror villain? That's what you're telling me, and that's just wrong.
Right. And I think, in hindsight, of course.
And they accepted this argument. I'm not saying that they accepted it 100%, but it's a valid argument, but I think it's also kind of interesting that no one's done it since.
That
is also interesting. It's a long time ago now.
That's the point I wanted to make. Is in hindsight now, he's one of the most iconic villains in this genre, and also one of the most progressive. And he's even noted as one of the most progressive characters in the genre, because he still remains to be maybe the only, well-known African-American villain in a horror film.
It's not comedic. He's not black humor. He's serious.
Right. Yes.
And I think that's true, and I think it's really. I think part of it's because of the way Tony played him, and that Tony had this sort of such an elegance about him. He's very emotional and very sympathetic. And you kind of loved him, even though he was awful, You never kind of disengaged from him anyway.
Exactly. Yeah.
His voice is almost very soothing in this weird, sort of evil way.
Yeah, no, he is. It's totally. Exactly.
It's scary, but almost soothing. It's hard to explain.
I remember watching when I was kind of sympathetic with him, because we have this established, history.
Right.
I kind of feel like, maybe I would kill a few people if I had that kind of backstory.
Sure, right. Of course,
maybe I would too.
Who could blame you?
That's right. And I think he has a kind of elegance to him. He's like Dracula in that sense, in that you don't really want them to kill Dracula. You want him to get rid of these awful, irritating people. No one likes Van Helsing, right?
Right, exactly.
Well, let's talk. If we're talking about Tony Todd, how did you meet him? Was this? Had you known him before filming Candyman? And I imagine you're still pretty close to him now.
Yeah, no, Tony is absolutely still a friend. In fact, Tony was just in the film that I just finished, which is my adaptation of Frankenstein.
Right.
And Tony plays the blind beggar in that.
Okay.
And he's kind of amazing in it.
I believe it.
I didn't know Tony before I did that film. I think I saw him in Platoon.
Oh yeah.
And he came in. A lot of different people came in and read, and he's so imposing, and he looks fantastic, and he's such a great actor,
Yeah. He's got quite a presence to him too.
He does. He really does, and he's a real sweetheart, Tony. He's a lovely guy.
Yeah. He's. I think again, there's a lot to credit him for Candyman, the success of it. He's just certainly, one of the more posing and powerful presences in a horror film that we've seen to date.
And he's very subtle and romantic in the film. He's not. Yeah, he's brutal when he needs to be, and he's intimidating, but he's subtle.
He's not over the top.
He's hypnotic.
Yeah, he's probably one of the most, if not the most lovable character in the film. I feel like I really I don't know. I connected with his character. I loved him to death. He's great in it.
Yeah, he is. I think he's the reason people still remember it. I think that's the point.
Right. Yeah. No. I mean, I think you can give him credit for that for sure. There's so many things going on in that film. It's too hard to even place everyone. Before I even pass over this notion, this is huge. Is you mentioned that Philip Glass did the score, and I definitely can't talk to you without asking about that. How'd that happen? What was that like?
Well, it was kind of a funny thing in that. Obviously when we were shooting the film, the subject came up, who do you want to do the score? And one of the producers was a man called Alan Poole, and I was talking to him about it, and I said, well, I'd really like somebody like Philip Glass. And Alan said, well, I happen to know him, why don't we ask him?
There you go.
I had worked on this film called Mishima, which was Paul Schrader's film about Yukio Mishima, the Japanese author, that Philip did a rather brilliant score for. And so Alan contacted Philip Glass, and he was going to be in Los Angeles, I think, in a couple of weeks, and he came over, and I met with him, and he saw some, a little bit of the film, and not very much of it actually, just some bits, and we discussed it, and he we talked about instrumentation and how he would do it, and he was rather busy, and he said he wasn't sure, so he went away, and then he said, yeah, he'd do it. So he did it. And the way that it worked, which was actually kind of interesting, was that Philip went away and he wrote a kind of Candyman suite, and Philip has a man called Michael Reisman who, Philip is very old school and he writes on paper.
Wow.
And then he has Michael Reisman would demo the stuff that he'd written, and he sent it to me, I think, on a cassette tape, shows you how long ago. He FedExed me a cassette tape some weeks.
Oh.
There
we go.
Did you miss me?
Missed you just a second there. It's all right.
You said he had a cassette tape.
Yeah, the cassette tape. And then I used the cassette tape while I was cutting the film, and I used the tape to help cut the film. I cut the film to the music that Philip had written, rather than the other way around. And then when it was done, Michael Reisman came in, and I ran it for him, and he adapted what was there, and then we went out and recorded it, with Michael conducting. And so during that part of the process, Philip didn't see the film, even though obviously it was his score. He'd seen the film in a very, 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 very early cut.
Right.
And he hadn't, and early cuts back then were different from early cuts now, because this was a film that was entirely post-produced on film, on a flatbed. So when you were cutting a film back then, there'd be sound, and it would just cut out. There was one track you had when you were cutting it. Things were much cruder at an early stage of post-production than they are now. Now everything looks finished, even when it's just a rough cut,
Right.
And so anyway, the film was shown to Philip in this very crude form, and he never really saw it between then and when it was finished. And I think when it was finished, it was done, and it was released, Philip went to he lives in New York, obviously, and he went to a screening of the film was playing in Times Square and in New York, and he went to one of the at that time slightly disreputable theaters in Times Square, and he watched the movie, and I think he was really shocked by it. He came out and he called up Alan, and he said, "Alan, what's going on? This is a horror movie."
This is exactly what I wanted to hear.
That's absolutely great.
And for years he wouldn't put the score out, and he kind of was like, "What did I do? I was bamboozled into doing it." He wasn't sure what it was that happened with it. He was a little and I think he was annoyed. And then years later, actually, funnily enough, he contacted me. I was making my film Mr. Nice, and he said that he basically offered his services to the school, and I was like,
Oh my
cool,
goodness.
Philip. Yeah, I'd love to work with you again. Let's just do it again. And so I went to New York to see him, and I said to him, okay, Philip, this is great. I'm really happy to be doing this again with you. But please, can you explain to me what went on with Candyman?
Oh my goodness.
Oh, I don't know. I was just being stupid. It's nothing. And I said, well, what changed your mind on it? And he said, do you have any idea what the royalties were over that?
Of course, yeah.
I think he made more money out of the movie than all the scores of his other films put together, and he was really, and he obviously he earned the publishing, you know.
Well,
and the film's been on television so many times, he just kept getting these checks, and after a while he was just like, what the hell? So he put the soundtrack album out years later, years. And on the sleeve of the soundtrack album, there's a cockamamie story about, oh, well, you know, he'd seen an early cut of the film and it was very arty, and then somehow it was all, someone had really redone it. That wasn't what happened at all.
See, we've been talking about this rumor about how the music was put to Candyman, and like we just didn't know if it was found. Did we tell our friends this, that Philip Glass was like, he was like almost like maneuvered into making this soundtrack, but or not soundtrack?
He wasn't. Not really. I just think he's just, you know, Philip's a lovely guy and he's a brilliant man, but you know he's kind of, he only takes he's pretty much confined to what he's doing.
Right, of course. Well, that actually that brings up another question. If we're on this kind of topic, I was just recently, actually right before this interview, I was watching a video of Siskel and Ebert talking about Candyman. And again, I know Ebert's actually really enjoyed the film, and he talks about how he loves the ideas and the gore being the fear factor, not just pure gore, insanity, slasher stuff. And then it was Siskel, though, who said something along the lines of, like, I really loved everything behind it, I loved the themes, but he's like, but once Candyman came up, it just was too gory and too scary for me. And, like, that's what he didn't like about it. And his thoughts were that maybe that was, like, kind of influenced by, like, producers, or, like, somebody had to step in and be like, we got to make this gory and scary or else blah, 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 blah. And I want to know if that, I don't know, assumption is just insane, or if that was any kind of influence at all.
No, I mean, the film was always intended as being gory and scary. I mean, you know, by the way, it's really hard to make a film scary. I don't know if people talk about it like as if it's something easy to do. Let me tell you, it really isn't.
Oh, absolutely.
We know from watching so many that aren't scary all the time, yeah. The ones that are genuinely scary are very few, very far between.
Which is one of the reasons. I was so blown away by Paperhouse because it scared the shit out of me. And I'm not afraid to admit that, because if you read about the subject matter, it wouldn't sound scary on paper. But like I think that talking to a director such as yourself, I think that we realize that the fear factor is more it's more like that human element. I don't know, knowing your audience or knowing people probably more than any kind of formula that you could put into it.
Well, one of the things I think that makes a film frightening is you have to establish yourself as a director that you have to undermine the audience's confidence in you. You have to let them know that you are a complete hooligan. You know, that you're not going to go in soft. You know, to me, like, if a film's rated PG-13, I'm already not going to it, because I go, oh, well,
sure, yeah.
Why should I sit through that garbage? You know, I think we should boycott PG-13.
It ends up
stop people making it. You know,
it's kind of the same for us when there's a new horror film in theaters and we're like, oh, PG-13, well, maybe we won't see that.
That basically axes it right there.
Because really,
of course, Paperhouse is PG-13. So, but.
Well, no, I think Paperhouse does actually feel kind of adult. I mean, not just there's like that one moment of gore, but it does have that, you know, like Devin said earlier with like something like Pan's Labyrinth. It's that like as an adult watching it, you kind of think back to being a kid, and it does take you to this different state that I think can be very scary, very surreal.
Yeah, no, it can, and I think that's what's great about it. But see, I also believe that you know, horror films shouldn't be limited to just being about scares. I think that's very limiting. Right. I think if you look at the great horror films, a lot of them just it's like the thing with a comedy. if you're trying to make a comedy and you pack it too full of laughs, if there's too many laughs in there, it stops being funny.
Right.
The same thing with horror films is that the ones that work, they haven't got 20 scares in them, maybe one that really hits you, you know, and that's much better than trying to like jam too much in there. Because if you're jamming everything in there, it will end up being nothing in a weird way, you know?
Right.
Yeah, too much noise can definitely like contribute to that, and that's something that I really like about Candyman is that it's kind of this like build up, and when things finally get to full force, it really hits you, it really scares you.
Yeah, and you know, it's one of the issues with a horror film is once you bring the villain on, you know, before you bring the villain on, you can build the dread to his appearance, but once he or she comes on, you don't really have anywhere to go except to have them kill more people, which is why sequels to horror films are so rarely frightening. And the more you make films with the villain as the central character, the more they turn into a kind of stand-up comedian.
Absolutely.
Because they've got nothing else to do except kill people and tell jokes.
I feel bad bringing this up because we talked about it earlier, but I feel like the Hellraiser series kind of went in that direction once you get past 2.
I mean, look, not naming names, and God only knows, there's nothing better than having a franchise you can milk and get paid for. I wish they hadn't stopped at 3 with Candyman, because, you know, I could do with the cash. But
Actually, that's funny. That's what I think Ebert said to open his interview. He was like, there's no doubt this Candyman figure is going to become the next Friday the 13th or Halloween franchise, blah, blah, blah.
That's a great line.
They had so many assuming statements. But I still want to come back to the question. When you made Candyman, now that I know that the gore and the violence and the visceral like images were there, that you put them there on purpose, I want to know kind of where that came from. Is that just something you kind of went into making the movie? You wanted to make that kind of, you wanted to make a horror movie?
yeah, I mean, it was a horror film. It wasn't intended as, you know, the idea was that, it's a film about a man with a hook who eviscerates people. I mean,
That's interesting because although first off, I'm 100% on your side. I'm almost kind of like playing devil's advocate. I believe that's the way it is and that's the way it should be. But it comes out also very beautiful, and you have these high critics praising it for these kind of things, and that's just very unheard of in the genre. And that's why it's cool to hear from you, from the director and writer who made it, to say like, no, I wanted to make a horror film, and I think that's what it is. I think it's great. And did that just come from growing up watching horror films? Were there any kind of inspirations going into this movie?
well, like I said, I like to, I've always enjoyed the rare, really good horror films. I was never, I mean, there are a couple of, well, in particular, John Carpenter's Halloween is a fantastic film. Just in terms, if you want to get into the slasher genre, so I wouldn't even say that I don't like slasher films. I also always really liked the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is a wonderful film.
So good.
But those films, they're very special because they really, really affect you, and especially if you see them at the right point in your life, they're indelible and they're unforgettable, and you can't shake them off. And I think that's the ambition to making a horror film, to make something that's like that. But what I was trying to say earlier is that I think that sometimes the horror film achieves a very narrow definition, and it changes. There's always a fashion going on. At the time when I made Candyman, the cycle of like kind of Freddy films and all that had slightly played out.
Right.
So the slasher film cycle of the 80s was kind of tired, and people didn't really want it anymore. They didn't know what else to do. But on the other hand, Silence of the Lambs had just been a really big hit. So there was this sort of move more towards a serial killer-y, procedural kind of film, like Silence of the Lambs and Seven, which actually came a couple of years later. But it was in that vein, But I think, again, what I wanted very much about with Candyman, and it was certainly very much a part of Clive's story, was the supernatural element. And, the whole point of Candyman is that he's a character. The film is about the nature of belief and legend, and that the people only the Candyman only exists because they believe in him.
Absolutely.
And they make him so. But then if they stop believing him, somebody kind of discredits him. Is there this moment where there's sufficient energy in the belief in him to manifest him and make him kind of fight for his own survival, you know?
Yeah, he lives in what I even mentioned. I don't know. He lives in the dreams and the whispers and all these things that people give, and without that, then he's nothing. And I think that adds an amazing element to the film. I want to ask.
He's like Tinkerbell.
Say that again.
He's like Tinkerbell in.
Yeah. Whenever I think of Candyman, I think Tinkerbell. Exactly.
Yeah.
No. I want to ask you now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you've dabbled in the genre of the horror genre since then too, with movies like Snuff Movie, and now you're working. Would you call Frankenstein? 'Cause I've been trying to find anything I can on that, and before we get too into it, is that kind of like a horror movie? Can you kind of tell us a little bit about it?
Well, Frankenstein is very interesting because I think it's a kind of cross-genre story traditionally, and as much as obviously it's based on. My film is very much based on the Mary Shelley novel,
Right.
which is dates from 1819.
Right.
It's nearly 200 years old, and I think that the novel essentially crosses three genres. It's a gothic horror story.
Right.
It's also the first science fiction novel,
Yeah.
and it's also it's also a quintessential work of romanticism.
Right.
I mean romanticism with a small r, not the word romantic now conjures the idea of like
Love and
love.
yeah.
It's not what romanticism means
Right.
at all.
So we're talking about the period, right?
Yeah. In that sense, it's a little bit cross genre, and my film is entirely from the point of view of the monster. It's modern, and it's about, in the film the monster has been manufactured in a laboratory as a sort of perfect human by Victor Frankenstein, and it's about this perfect guy wakes up in a laboratory and he doesn't know who he is or how he got there or what's going on, and it's just about his experiences, and it's about this very violent world that he finds himself in, where pretty soon people treat him appallingly, and he learns violence from them, but he's better at it than they are. So yeah, there's horror in it, and there's some pretty gnarly violence in it, actually.
Well,
Is this like a work that you've been infatuated with for a while and you sought out, or did this just kind of come to you?
No, it was my project very much, and it's kind of a personal film in a weird way.
Good.
And when is this going out? When are you going to put this out?
Are you talking to us right now? Oh, this podcast. I thought you were talking about the movie. I was like, are you talking to a producer?
I want it right now.
No, this is coming out on Wednesday, so 2 days from now.
Oh, Wednesday. Well, then I can't tell you what I'm going to see, because the thing that I'm going to tell you is going to be announced on Thursday.
Oh,
no. Maybe
We
after
should
the recording.
yeah.
If you just said Thursday, I would have told you. But basically, it's going to premiere somewhere in April, but they are announcing on Thursday, so I shouldn't really tell you.
Sure, no,
Okay.
that's fine, but we'll keep up with you, and we'll check up on that. I mean, that's one we want to see.
It's coming out later this year. It's done. It's all done. And it's pretty. I could show you something illegally. It's just, I don't know if I can make this work. Probably not.
Hey,
The
try it
jankier,
out.
the better.
Yeah, try it out. Let's see this.
We'll just
So what?
The jankier.
We'll just blur it.
What does janky mean?
It's how would you guys describe it?
Janky, I don't know.
Like
just like
Ghetto.
Slapped together.
Yeah, right. Slapped together. Thank you. I only know other slang words. I'm just a boy from Kentucky. What do I know?
Yeah. Okay. I don't know how well this is going to work, because I think I'm taking up all my internet bandwidth.
Oh man.
Let's bog it down. Don't you all have like super internet in California?
I told you I'm stealing my next door neighbor's internet.
Oh wait, we can't tell that either.
What if they watch this podcast and they put a password on there?
Right. What if they listen? No, nobody listens.
Well, they won't care. Well, no, because they don't know. They don't know which one it is.
Oh,
There you go.
there you go.
Hang on.
Oh wow, I like.
Hang on a minute.
No, I'm interested in this. I like where this is headed.
Can you hear it?
Yeah.
Hang on. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, we can.
I'm loving
Director's
this.
cut.
I'm loving this.
For life. He'll be perfect. He'll be beautiful. Where he does not exist. He is nothing but clay. We can all breathe life into him. He's alive! He's alive!
Backwards.
Know what I do. The cells didn't replicate correctly.
Just do something!
Stop! You can't walk here!
Can you come stop with me?
Put the girl down!
You did some very bad things.
Are you a man or are you an animal?
Oh, man.
No! Stop!
We made you. We created you.
There you go.
Oh man,
Beautiful.
That's exciting.
That was awesome, man.
That's
I saw lots of blood.
Mirror, can't read the title.
Okay, and that I just realized that's what his name's Xavier Samuel. I recognize him from I think he was in one called Loved Ones recently.
And he's in Twilight.
Oh, is he?
I did not know that.
I had no idea. We watched Loved Ones, and he was
It's
great.
funny that I
He
know
was
him from
awesome,
Loved
man.
Ones, but not Twilight.
Yeah. That looks fantastic, and we got to check up on Thursday though to learn more about that.
So what channels can we go to find that?
Well, it's going to come out later this year. I mean, I'm still organizing, how distribution is going to work for it. But it's going to premiere at a festival in April. Actually, not in the US, but at a major horror and fantasy festival.
So you just finished that up. Now it's almost ready to go out. Did you work on that like pretty much all last year?
Yeah, it's done now. The film is finished. I've delivered it. And it stars, as you see, Carrie Ann Moss, Danny Houston. I don't know if you know him from American Horror Story and
Right.
stuff.
Yeah.
And Xavier Samuels and Tony Todd.
Tony
Who
Todd.
you in that trailer.
Yeah,
exactly
he
the
looked
name I wanna
great. He
hear.
looked great.
That was cool. Well, you can't. I don't know how much you can tell us, but you mentioned that it was kind of a personal film. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that or maybe talk about your influences.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, the film is a lot artier than that trailer might imply.
That's usually how it goes. 'Cause
Yeah, that's what happens. You know, that happens a lot. I feel like.
we've heard that they kind of a lot of the companies that you all work through kind of take over the reins on those trailers, don't they?
Oh God, but you want to let them. I don't want to do that.
But yeah, I don't know. So I'm excited.
Yeah, yeah. So this one's kind of like a personal one to you, a passion project, because again, I wanted to bring up that you seem to dabble in and out of the horror genre here and there, and this one seems like you're coming back to it a little bit. And I don't want you to say too much, but now I just kind of want to know that you've been kind of doing these kind of movies for the past 10 years. Have there been any films that you've seen that have stuck out to you in the past 10, 15 years in the horror
In the
genre?
horror genre.
Yeah.
Well, I really liked the first Paranormal Activity. Actually, I thought that was a
Yeah.
really
Sure,
good
yeah.
one.
We kind of did too. That movie gets a lot of unfair hate, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. It was very effective.
It was. I saw it in theaters
Right.
with Brandon here,
Yeah,
and it was a full theater. And there, at the beginning of the movie, there was a lot of like people being,
Making
obnoxious.
jokes and stuff.
But by the middle of the movie, it seemed like everybody was scared. I was scared.
It's a very simple and elegant
Yeah.
frightening idea, you know.
Yeah.
And you're right, it's a very unfairly maligned movie. It's the same way, actually, even more so, Blair Witch, I thought was a great movie.
Yeah,
very
absolutely.
original. Came out.
Yeah,
About 10 years ago now.
yeah,
Actually, a long time ago.
Yeah.
But it was a very good movie, you know. And I like those movies because I know that the whole found footage thing has become like horrendously overdone.
Sure.
But that happens in horror cycles. And I think both those two movies were extremely groundbreaking when they came out, cinematically and conceptually and everything else, you know.
No, absolutely. I think just like that film, I feel like the found footage as a, I don't know, as a subgenre gets a lot of unfair hate because there are great ones out there, but to be fair, like these ones like Paranormal and Blair Witch come out, and then we have about 100 other ones that try to go off the, you know,
It's been
ride the
bastardized.
coattails, and yeah, it becomes this garbage genre. But no, those two movies I think were some of the most effective of their time, and I think that's great. It's funny to think that Blair Witch came out only about 6 years after Candyman, now that I think about it.
I think it was 1999, yeah, it was
7 years?
8 years.
Yeah.
8 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Then that was probably that probably set off the whole, I don't know, found footage madness that
Well, it
happened.
did, though, of course, really, I think the first found footage film is the Cannibal film.
Holocaust. Yeah. No, for sure.
Diodato movie. Great movie.
Yeah. I wouldn't attribute it to Blair Witch. I think that one just, I don't know, blew up in an insane kind of way.
Yeah. It did, and it was a very good movie, too.
Right. All right. Well, sure. Well, let's wrap up here. I want to ask you if you want to take the chance to give some plugs, any kind of information. If you don't, that's fine.
I think you disappeared for a minute.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I just said, if you want to now, I want to give you the chance to give some plugs if you want. If there's any kind of website, anything you want to tell our listeners before we let you go.
I wish I could.
Yeah. Well, I think
the Frankenstein thing I want to plug, I guess. No,
Yeah.
but I mean, not in a stupid way. I think we've already plugged that, right?
right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was great.
I think it's almost more powerful that you can't say it than if you actually did. So,
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I mean, it's not available yet, but it's going to be, and I think it's, you know, for me, I think, you know, it's important for people who are real genre fans to you know, to demand more of the horror films that are coming out, you know.
Completely
I mean, I think there is, at the moment, there is kind of a movement for better horror films, like It Follows. I don't know if you saw that.
right. Yep.
And what's the other one called? The Babadook.
Yep,
Yeah.
I had a feeling you were going to say that. Yeah, that
I
was a
love
good
that
one.
movie.
But I think that's great because that's what horror should be like.
Mhm.
It should be something really inventive and different and challenging, you know. And I want to try and keep doing that. You know, I like to do other things too. I don't only like to make horror films. But I do really like the genre, and I really like the kind of loyalty that the people who love it have for it. And I think sometimes, as filmmakers, people are a little bit, they take it for granted, and they give people too much shit, you know?
Yeah.
Right. No, absolutely. I think that's a feeling that we all have. And if we're mentioning Babadook, is it crazy that I kind of made the comparison that Babadook maybe borrowed a little bit from Candyman? Because I feel like it's got the same kind of supernatural element that you wonder whether it's supernatural or whether it's...
Oh, I remember you saying that when we watched Babadook. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was a while back, but yeah.
Yeah, I think all those films, they all stem from this thing which I think is central to the horror movie of like, you know, the supernatural manifested. And that's why, in a way, I think Frankenstein is to some degree more of a drama, because my film is really just about this guy who doesn't know who he is or what he is or where he came from, and he's trying to kind of get the existential questions that we all have answered.
Mm-hmm.
Who am I? Where did I come from? What's my purpose in life? And the monster doesn't know what that is, and that's the essential problem of Mary Shelley's book, and that's such a universal question. That's why the book is still read 200 years later.
It's still relevant, yeah.
Right. Well, guys, you guys heard it. Frankenstein's coming out this year. As soon as we figure out the news, we will make sure to plug it on our Twitter, Facebook, Gmail, stuff like that. So yeah, guys, once again, we're on Facebook.
I've got my Twitter, I suppose, which is Bernard J.M. Rose. by the way.
Okay, Bernard J.M. Rose. That's at Bernard.
J.M. for mother.
Yes, gotcha. All right. Yeah, and you guys check that out too. So yeah, first off, Bernard, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It was
Well,
awesome.
thank you. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, we
It's been
really
great.
did too. It was seriously such an honor to talk with you. So guys, on behalf of the Horrorble Crew, and of course Bernard Rose, stay spooky.
It was just me that time.
Yeah.
All right.
Bernard, thank you so
Bye.
much.
Thank you so much, man.
Appreciate it.
Just you send me a link and let me know when you got it up. Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna edit it and do what we can audibly, and then we'll send you we'll try to send you the link before we post it. But yeah, we're just gonna edit out just like the
I didn't say anything that I have a problem with, so do what you need to do. Yeah.
Great.
awesome.
I'm gonna edit tomorrow when I get home from work. I'll share it with you, and if you look at it at your leisure, whatever. If you do happen to listen to it before we share it, feel free to share any critiques or anything if you want to change anything.
I'll be fine with it. Unless you grossly distort anything I'm saying.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. We're gonna distort it just like the old Hitler thing that you did on Paperhouse. We'll just change your voice to
Now that I know that that's open source, it's all mine.
All right. Enjoy your evening.
All right, take
you
care,
too.
Bernard.
Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Woo.